Hey y'all, Jay Nice on the mic, back with another video. So this is part 3. This is the last part for now of this series on tips to get into DEI or to become a DEI consultant. So tip number 1 is, I'm scrolling, looking back through my list. Tip number 1 is, and this is important, so this is, all of these videos are important, but this one is where we get into the nitty gritty. So tip number 1 is, if you are white and you want to get into racial equity consulting, I think you should reevaluate and think about that again. I personally, and again, this is my personal views, one person, Janice Gassamasari, this is just my views. I find it problematic when I see white racial equity consultants, white DEI consultants doing racial equity work. It is often in a way that is capitalizing off of the marginalization and the oppression of non-white people. So like, as a white DEI consultant, oftentimes you are getting access and opportunities that non-white people are not getting. Even as a Black woman, I am often not seen as an expert in my own oppression. A company is more likely to value and believe the words of a white man than they are me as a Black woman. So if you are trying to create a world that is more equitable, where you're dismantling oppressive systems, you need to recognize how harmful it is that you're taking up space as a racial equity consultant. Now, this is not to say that white folks can't do DEI work, because that's why I like to make the distinction and the differentiation. And I'll leave some articles I wrote about this below, but I really think that when it comes to racial equity, I feel like lived experience is very important. I don't think it's the only thing you need, but I think having lived experience makes you better equipped to do this work as a racial equity consultant. I think you can be a DEI consultant, a DEI manager, and focus on, there's, again, like we talked about, there's a plethora of topics and avenues and areas that you can focus on. But I think when it comes to race specifically, we do a lot of white centering. And again, I'm going to have a bunch of resources in the show notes, but like in DEI work, there's a lot of centering the feelings, centering the needs, centering the desires of white people, whether that's white leadership, white employees, white customers, whomever it is. And very few times, it is very few and far between where I see companies really prioritizing the needs of racially marginalized employees. So it's really important that you are not taking up a lot of space, and to reevaluate and interrogate ways that you are profiting off of the very systems you are trying to create. An example of this for me that I'm constantly thinking of is, what space am I taking up as a lighter skinned Black woman, as a woman with a proximity to whiteness? How am I more palatable to companies and to different audiences and to different groups of people? And how can I make way for people that don't have the same access and opportunities and privileges as I do? How can I amplify the voices of folks who don't have, again, the same access and opportunities and privileges that I do? How am I aware of the space that I'm taking up? And I recently watched a video. I have my throat coat tea that's helping me because I had a little bit of a cough, but I think it was Mayowa's World. If not, I watched someone's Instagram video, right? It might have been Mayowa's World. But she's a great YouTuber to learn from, and great YouTube channel to follow if you're not familiar with her. But Mayowa or Mayowa's World, on their channel, they talked about social justice movements, and how a lot of times when we look at these social justice movements and we look at the black figures and the women that are thrust to the top of the what would you call it, like, that we pedestalize, these are usually light-skinned women. All of this, we pedestalize lighter skinned women. And so I find that I'm constantly asking myself, or trying to figure out, like, how am I taking up space? And are there ways that I can move to the side and give up and reallocate my access and my privileges and my opportunities to folks that don't have those same access and opportunities and privileges? So I say all that to say, as a white person in the space, you have to recognize ways that you can replicate the very same harms that you are trying to dismantle. You're trying, quote unquote, to dismantle. So it's really important that you are not taking up too much space. So if you're a white person watching this who wants to get into DEI consulting, who wants to be a DEI consultant, you have to really, really interrogate the ways that you are taking up space and the ways that you have opportunities and privileges, and what ways can you share the power with others that don't have those same access and opportunities and privileges. If you are really about it, and if you're really committed to creating safer spaces and promoting equity, that's what has to be done. So along those same lines, we also have to think about, and a tip for anyone who wants to get into DEI consulting, who is a DEI consultant, and something that I try to ask myself often is, what am I doing to check my internalized biases? What am I doing to check my internalized biases? Audre Lorde, and I have the quote right here because I'm going to read it so I don't mess up the quote, but this is one of my favorite Audre Lorde quotes, right? This really, really touched me the first time that I read it. But this Audre Lorde has a quote from one of her books where she wrote, I'm trying to think which book it was of hers that I read, but she said in this book, the true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations that we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within us. I'm gonna put the quote below so you can just like pause this and take a moment to soak that in real quick, right? It's so important that as folks that are hired to help organizations create more equitable systems, that we are also checking our own internalized biases, our own anti-Blackness, our own internalized oppression. And I'll put a resource down in the description box. I wrote an article about internalized oppression and ways that it shows up in the workplace. And some of you may find it interesting, so I'm going to put it in the description box. But I ask myself this often and try to ask myself, like, what are ways that I've internalized? And I think for me, I have to check my fat phobia. I have to check we grew up, for those of us who grew up in the United States and in Western society, we grew up in nations and countries that told us that women have to look a certain way, and that people who are of a particular weight have all of these negative stereotypes that we should ascribe to them. And it's taking me many, many years to unlearn those things that I've learned. And the sort of the thoughts that come to my mind when I see myself gaining weight or I see myself losing weight, and that's not happening, right? Because every year, and since I'm getting older, our metabolism slows down. I've been gaining weight, right? And some of you who are my OG subscribers may know this, but I used to do bodybuilding, and I competed in 4 different competitions And it was more of a hobby for me because I'm not a competitive person. I've never been competitive, so I didn't do it to win. I know some people are like, why do it if you're not going to win? I did it so I could, as corny as it sounds, like see different iterations of my body. But I really did it because I felt like it could help to push me to be thin. I've always been chasing this idea of thinness. My mom tells me the story of me being like 10 years old, and I was running and running, and I was in predominantly white schools, and I was running and running and running, and we had a soccer field behind where we lived, and I would run on the soccer field, and I would come inside and give her a kiss and say, "Hi, mommy," and she's like, "You look tired. Why are you running so much?" And I'm like, "My legs are never gonna get big. I'm never gonna have big legs," because I had a teacher who made a comment about my calves, right? Because I have big calves, right? I don't know, maybe I can throw a picture in. I don't know if I have pictures of just my legs, but I've always had it. I get it from my mom. My mom has big, very thick calves. I have that, right? And so at 10 years old, this is what was going through my mind. So I understand and recognize the ways that I've internalized the ways that I've internalized fat phobia, and I'm trying to unlearn that, and it's taking time. So I think it's so important for us as DEI consultants, aspiring DEI consultants, before we can help people unravel and unpack their own biases, we have to be able to do that within ourselves. And it's a constant thing. It's not like there's no finite point where you're gonna be done doing that. It's a lifelong journey. So I have to check myself with that a lot. That's something I'm trying to work on. And I'm also trying to learn more about how to best advocate for the trans community and trans individuals. How do I not take up space? How do I pass them the mic? And so all of these things are really, really important. And again, that goes to this tip that I've been talking about as far as making sure that you are checking your own biases and making sure that you're not replicating the same oppressive systems, or you're not buying into the same oppressive systems that you're trying to mitigate and you're trying to deconstruct. That's the word. I was trying to find the word in my head. So yeah, that's really, really important to be constantly checking our own internalized oppression and our internalized biases. Okay, and the last tip that I can offer you, and we talked about this a little bit before. But asking yourself the question of, what will you do to constantly stretch yourself and learn about best practices? What are you doing to constantly learn and grow? And this kind of goes along with the last, as far as checking your internalized biases. But like, as a DEI consultant, especially as an external DEI consultant, what stretch assignments and what ways are you stretching yourself? Not just as far as not only just expanding your knowledge and your awareness, but really like, what am I doing to learn about best practices and learn how to do this work in a way that is sustainable and that will help to support the most marginalized people? I know I talked about this a little bit in one of the previous videos, but I try to listen to a lot of podcasts. And well, I'm a YouTube person, right? I have YouTube Premium, and this is not an ad for YouTube Premium, but I do think it was definitely a good investment because I can listen to YouTube videos like podcasts. So I have like 100+ videos in my watch later list. And I think like I learn so much. I watch so many videos, and I'm constantly learning and growing and asking myself, how can I integrate this into the work that I do? And so you have to ask yourself, what will you do to constantly stretch yourself and learn about best practices? Because we all are on this journey of life to get better and to do better and to evolve. And as a DEI consultant, we have to also hold ourselves accountable and ask ourselves, what are we doing to evolve our understanding and our thinking and our ways of doing things? If something isn't working, how do we get better? How do we readjust? What do we do to learn more and to grow more? And you know, so it's really important as a DEI consultant or as somebody trying to get into the space to ask yourself, what can you do to constantly stretch yourself? For me, again, I try to solicit feedback often from my clients, and I think that's a growing and learning practice in itself. And reading the reviews with my workshops, a lot of times are overwhelmingly positive, but sometimes you get those reviews where it ain't good. You know what I'm saying? And even as a professor, I think student evals are a constant sort of humbling, a constant sort of source to humble us, right? Because student evals, there's always going to be somebody in there saying something. So I think it's really important to ask yourself, what will you do to constantly stretch yourself and learn about best practices? And that could be just reading and soaking up knowledge. It could be writing. It could be writing reports. It could be doing videos. There's a lot of different ways. There's no like best way. There's several different, whatever works for you, but you have to constantly be growing and evolving your way of thinking and evolving the ways that you do this work within the workplace. You know, I think that that's really important. What worked 10 years ago or 20 years ago to help the company support marginalized employees might not work today. You know what I'm saying? So like really not being afraid to pivot and readjust if something isn't working. So that is the end of this little 3-video series. If you have any questions, I want to say you know where to find me, but y'all might not know. I live on LinkedIn, or you could visit my website to learn more about me and the work that I do, the DEI work I do, or you could just shoot me an email. I got like 5 emails. I got 5 passports. I'm never going to jail. No, I'm going to try to figure out which email I'm going to leave below, but you could shoot me an email, or you could, I'll leave my website info and you can contact me through there. If you have questions, you could drop comments below. But I found that there was a surge in people watching that video about DEI consulting. And then when I speak with people, sometimes if I'm like doing any mentoring, people are like, I saw your video. I'm like, I hate that video. No, I don't hate the video. It's old. I feel like it's a little outdated. But it's okay, because there's always, we always have the ability to make new videos and to update things. And so, yeah, that's where I'm going to leave off this video. I will check y'all out in the next video.